Right, hello and welcome to our week 2 announcements video. So I'm making this Sunday early evening, and some people have turned in some assignments, so that's great because I can comment a bit on those assignments. And that's an important thing to kind of think about. Okay, what grade did I get? What can I do to make it better? Or if it's where you're at, what do I need to or where you want to be, what can I do to keep it where it is? So one thing to do is you want to make sure your answers on your study guides are comprehensive as well as accurate, and they show that you actually understand the material. Some of the study guides I was checking, it wasn't quite clear that the student understood what was going on there. And the problem is, if you watch a video on Monday and write your answers on Monday, but you don't take the quiz till Friday, you won't really, unless you answered it really clearly, you'll look back and say, what was I thinking on Monday, right? If you give a very short answer, you may forget it, and then you may not have enough in your study guide to make sure that you can remember the answer for when you're getting ready for that quiz. Remember, the quizzes are open notes, so you can go back and check over your answers. If your study guide has good answers, it'll be relatively easy to find them. And that's why full sentences tend to be better than bullet points. Especially bullet points, people are tempted to just copy out what's on the PowerPoint and just kind of ignore me explaining it. And just to give you an example, one thing that's very important is to understand who the Manchu are and what the Qing is. And notice I said Manchu are, Qing is. The Manchu are a group of people. It's an ethnic group. The Qing is a dynasty that governed China. The people who governed the Qing, the emperors, were of the Manchu ethnic group. And from some people's answers, I couldn't tell if they understood what the Manchu and the Qing were. And one student even referred to the Qing using the pronoun he, which would seem to indicate the student thought that the Qing is a person, but that's not a person. The pronoun would be it, because the Qing is a thing, right? The Qing is the dynasty that governed China, that was ruled by the Manchu ethnic group, which are different from the Han ethnic group, who are the vast majority of Chinese people. And that's a very important concept to understand. If you don't understand it, you're not only going to have trouble with this quiz, you'll have trouble with future ones. So do make sure that you're filling out those study guides comprehensively as well as accurately, in a way that you can look back after several days and still understand what you had written, what that information is. When you fill out your reading assignments, please don't delete the questions, right? Please don't delete the questions. It makes it a lot easier for me to grade if the questions are still there. Now, what I usually do is I check through the study guides and I check through the reading guides, and I make some comments both in the text and outside. And if you have trouble viewing the comments, please do feel free to let me know. But I would encourage you, go back and see the comments I made. Sometimes, if you got a good grade, I just say, hey, great work. Sometimes people will say something really clever, and I'll say, hey, that's a nice idea. But also I may know, and I'll say, well, I don't really understand this answer. Or, there's something here, it's not quite clear that you understand the information. And over time, the first time I look at the assignments, I try to be pretty clear, and I'll give you lots of examples like, well, this is unclear, this is unclear, this is unclear, this is incorrect. But I don't go through and correct everything, right? That's kind of, you would want to go back and review that. But if I ever give you a grade and you're just not sure why, I'm happy to go through and add more comments. And as time goes on, I give less and less comments simply because I figure that people, they know what's expected of them. But anytime you want more comments, let me know. I'm happy to give them to you. One thing I want to really stress, make sure you complete the study guides before you take the quiz, right? The study guide, it's very important that you fill that out, you got it ready, and then you take the quiz. And it's good to review and study. And one thing to think about, if you had trouble with the quiz, consider how you prepared your study guide and studied, right? So, for example, if you just sat down one day and tried to fill out the whole study guide and didn't study it before you took the quiz, you probably didn't do so well in the quiz, right? This is one thing that makes summer classes so difficult, is just the amount of information that you're being hit with is a lot. And it's really easy just to get bogged down in just getting the information and then not studying it. Right? It's important not only that you're exposed to the information through the videos, but you actually take the time to study it. And I have to stress this is a 300 level history class, right? It's not, it is meant in many ways to be a kind of a difficult class because of the level. And you maybe aren't familiar with it. Lots of Chinese, Japanese, and Korean terms that you need to know. But that's just something to think about. So I need to, let's switch over now and talk a little bit about what's coming up with the, or actually, let's look at the schedule. So this is just your kind of normal schedule: Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Remember, that's just my suggestions. And then just like this last week, we have a week 2 study guide, writing assignment 2, week 2 quiz. Do note that week 3, right? We're coming into week 2. Week 2 will start on Monday. Week 3, so a week from this coming Monday, is Memorial Day, right? So because there's a Memorial Day, I don't have as many videos, right? And you'll notice the study guides and things aren't worth quite as much. And the answer is simple, right? There's a day off, right? So like I said, this is an online class, but it's meant to be equivalent to an in-person class. So if there's a day off in an in-person class, I give you less work. So that's just something to kind of keep in mind, though, for this upcoming week. But you've got your normal Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday ideal schedule. You don't have to follow that necessarily. It's just a suggestion. And then you've got your week 2 study guide, your writing assignment, and your week 2 quiz, all due by 11:59 p.m. Sunday. Now let's look very briefly at the study guide. So, we're looking at the first videos looking over how Japan, now that it has a lot of power in Korea, having defeated China in that first Sino-Japanese war, is going to try and reform Korea, but the Japanese will be pushed out. And then they'll have to fight another war with Russia to be able to gain control over Korea. All right, so Japan is going to fight 2 wars, one with China we already talked about, the second one with Russia that we'll talk about, in order to gain control over Korea. And then Japan is going to actually take over Korea, and we'll look at the process once they've defeated Russia, how they're going to take over Korea, and they're going to complete this and annex Korea in 1910. Now, there's several videos about this guy named An Chung-gun, and I specialize in An Chung-gun. I've done a lot of work on him. I actually helped translate some of his documents into English. And he's a very important Korean national hero. Why is he a Korean national hero? Because he killed a Japanese national hero, Ito Hirobumi. And that shows kind of the difficult relationships between these two countries even to this day. And if you ask any Korean, they know who An Chung-gun is. And so I do talk a lot about him. And it's not simply because I'm a specialist in him, right? We've got several videos on him. There's like 3. But also because he is important for a class on East Asia, because he's someone who tried to figure out, how do we get China, Japan, and Korea to work together well? And he's someone who's interacting and with these 3 regions intellectually and trying to figure out, okay, how do we work together? Right? So he's someone who doesn't just think, oh, I'm a Korean. He's someone who thinks I'm an East Asian. And this is modern East Asian history class. So that's why we spend a lot of time on him. What can be a little confusing is that, we'll get to Korea about 1910, then we'll jump back in time to talk about what happened to China after that first Sino-Japanese war, which occurred 1894 to 1895. And China, to make a long story short, gets beaten really badly in that war. And so then they're going to be looking for reform. How do we fix our country? And some people want to have a revolution. They want to overthrow the Qing Empire. We'll also have a video after that talks about how China will successfully overthrow the Qing and establish a republic, which will quickly fall apart. After that, we'll shift to Japan, and we'll talk about how, while Japan, in many ways, you look at Japan, it's like they're the clear winners, right? They win all these wars, they take over Korea, and so there's a lot of Japanese who are proud, but there's also a lot of anxiety. There's a lot of fears in Japan. And those fears will eventually lead to the rise of Japanese radicalism. There will be Japanese radicals who say, you know what? We need to go further. The radical reforms of the Meiji era were not enough. We need socialism, or we need communism, or we need a right-wing movement. And then there is a documentary, not a video, I made called Writers and Revolutionaries that will talk a lot about this guy, Lu Shoon, who's one of my favorite authors, and I'll talk about him momentarily. And then and he's Chinese. And we'll also talk about Kita Iki, who is a very important thinker, but is also someone... and this is one thing I think it's fun is in this video, is a professor who trained me in Japanese history back when I was an undergraduate. He was in a documentary about Kita Iki. It's this documentary. So when Professor George Wilson shows up, he was my teacher. Awesome guy. And then we'll talk about, a lot of what we're trying to do is talk about how Japan, which in many ways was pro-Western, was following Western-style radical reform, is eventually going to turn away from the West and turn inwards right? And that's going to help lead to World War II. We'll then kind of back off. We're not going to quite get to World War II yet. We're going to then look at what Japan was doing in Korea from 1910 to the 1930s. And then that would be it for the videos. Now, I need to talk briefly about the writing assignment. There's 2 excerpts. One is Lu Shoon's A Madman's Diary. This is a fascinating reading. I really like Lu Shoon. He could be a little difficult. He uses a lot of satire. He has a lot of dry, cynical humor, and I think that's great. That's one reason I like him. It can make him a little bit difficult to understand, so you want to give yourself a little bit of time to understand this, but he uses the idea of a madman, a crazy person, and cannibalism as symbolism of what's going on in China at this time. So, I mean, it's a great story because it's got insanity and cannibalism in it. The other reading you'll have is just called Shiguru Mizuki, and this is actually a manga. It's a Japanese-style comic. And one thing I want to note, this is really confusing. You read it right to left. Okay, so just be ready for this. When you read this, don't start in the left and read right like you would with a Western book. Start on the right side of the page and read to the left. It takes a while to get used to. And it goes like this. It goes, you start on the right and you read down, and then you jump to the left and you read down. So you make like a reverse N, right? Start on the right, read down, move to the left, read down. And I do need to say a little bit about these authors very briefly. So on the left, this is Lu Shoon, this Chinese author. And one thing I want to talk about, one thing I should stress when I talk about Lu Shoon, this guy's not like someone that Chinese people have never heard of. He's assigned in Chinese high schools. So, something like 1 billion people read this guy's stories in Chinese, right? So that's if you talk to any Chinese person and you say, oh yeah, I read Lu Shoon, I read The Madman's Diary, they may not know that particular story. There's some other stories of his that are more well-known. I just chose Madman's Diary because it's short. And I think it's kind of cool. But they will know who Lu Shoon is. So I just want to note him. He's very important in Chinese history. I love the guy. This is Shiguru Mizuki. And you're reading a comic, and you're going to read several excerpts of comics from his that are stories of his life. Right, so Shiguru Mizuki. Now, he's pictured here with a character he designed, Shintaro, I believe is his name. And Shintaro is a part yokai, right? Yokai. Yokai are like Japanese spirits. And you'll notice that he has kind of a weird style, right? He has his hair, so you can only see one eye. And that's because his father lives in his other eye. His father is an eyeball. And so, his son only has one eye, which is convenient because then that lets his father live here. And his father isn't in his eye socket right now. He's somewhere else. So that's why his hair is there to hide that blank eye socket. Japanese are great at coming up with cool ghosts. And Shiguru Mizuki is known for coming up with ghost stories, yokai stories. And we'll just make that the password. So the password is yokai. That's Y-O-K-A-I, yokai. If you misspell it, it's okay. But these Japanese ghosts. Now, why would I choose this guy of all people? There's lots of manga artists. Why would I choose this guy? Well, first of all, he is very old. And in fact, he passed away just a few years ago. I believe he was in his 80s, maybe his 90s, in fact. And so when he writes, the manga you're going to be reading is not about this character. The manga you're going to be reading is about his life, right? It's going to be about his life. So Shiguru Mizuki, here he is as an old man. He's going to be a little boy in the story you're reading. He lived in the 1920s in Japan, right? Into the 1920s and 1930s. And he's doing the story of his life. So I think it's kind of cool, right? I want you to see how people who lived through this time period understood things, and what better way to do that than through a manga, right? And that's kind of the cultural aspect of this. And one thing I want to note, you may notice in this picture, it's kind of odd, right? This arm, I mean, it's there, it looks natural. Here, it looks kind of weird. And the answer is, the reason this looks weird is he doesn't have a left arm. He was a Japanese soldier during World War II. He got drafted and had to fight in the Japanese army. And the Americans, we launched a bombing raid, and one of his arms was severely injured and had to be amputated. Now, fortunately, it was his left arm, and he's right-handed, so he could go in and draw manga. But how can I not assign to you, in a class that includes Japanese history, a manga about Japanese history written by a guy who lost his arm in World War II, right, and still became a manga artist. I mean, it's just too cool, I think, not to include. And I hope you will enjoy it. So with all that said, I hope you're enjoying the class, and good luck with our second week. And I hope you enjoy the readings. As always, if you have any questions, do please let me know.